Yeah, there's always, every year there's inquiries as to whether we're going to play and do things again, and when the time feels right, if it feels right, then we consider it. We'd been working together in Blackline, and that has a big effect on it. We've been working together in another project, and that was really good fun. So, obviously if you're enjoying working together again and, you're getting these inquiries to do things, then that becomes a consideration. And then throughout the previous years, I'd been going back to Chelmsford and just hanging out with David and Simon when they were doing their Stark project, and there was something nice about this sort of live electronic thing that they were doing that was really raw and kind of just edgy and rough, and I really really enjoyed kind of the direction they were going in. So it was just like thinking, first step, we are enjoying working together. If we were going to come back and do it again, what makes sense rather than just doing the same thing? And so kind of, you were talking about context earlier, just like recontextualizing the band. We've so we're told, influenced a lot of dance music, and just maybe going back in that direction or more in that direction and experimenting a bit with that. So there were a lot of factors, where it just sort of seemed to feel right and make sense to come back and do it this way, have a slightly expanded lineup, change the approach a little bit, so maybe it's not quite so much rock and roll and a little more electronic. It was just everything felt right, and there were a lot of different ingredients.
Cool.
I think the fun element is a big thing. That overall, I think that was one thing that we all agreed on before coming back, that it's too easy. There's a lot of expectations on this band and a lot of history and everything else. So, one thing that we all wanted to do was to just try and not for it to get too serious and too heavy and just keep the fun aspect. Some of it is like just being old friends, we know each other so well, but also because it's a completely different environment for us to be working together, it's a little bit odd and a little bit strange to get used to it. It's kind of, even Doug and I's relationship, off stage or off tour is different than it is on, because it's a working environment, and you have a professional attitude and you have to deal with certain things in a professional way. So it's a mixture. It's a mixture of familiar and very, very new, and sometimes a little bit strange,
Yeah, one of the things that we decided quite early on, for a couple of reasons. One, the practicality of it, because David was doing a lot of the pre-production work at his studio at home in Chelmsford in Essex. So the practicality meant that it was easier for us to come from LA, but also on a psychological level, we wanted it to be restarting in Essex, in Chelmsford, kind of back to where it all began. And that's been kind of like a nice, like something to lean on, like a, sort of like a touchstone of like, all right, like there's a lot of the early sort of get-togethers where they were, constructive chats, but there was a lot of just catching up on a lot of nonsense from when we were all living together. No, he left before that. He left pretty much almost immediately after we signed to Mute. He did a few shows with us in Europe, but it wasn't.
Yeah, the way they've run things in Stark is, Dave kind of has a mix and runs some backing tracks and does live effects and live processing and that kind of stuff. And Simon has a little setup of live electronics that he just kind of improvises with, So this whole run that we're doing is a little bit of a beta test for us, just to see how it works. And so, we'll probably expand the live electronic side thing so we can all share it a little bit and be a little more loose and maybe swap roles, and so they're sort of improvisation within a structure. We knew that it was going to be a bit of a work in progress. You knew that there were probably going to be some rough edges and things like this, and some of the point is we didn't necessarily want the show to be as set of a format as it has been in the past. So even one show to another, they may have to be judged relatively because we wanted to do different things. So so it was always going to be a little bit like show by show, you know, how did that go, what worked, what didn't, that sort of stuff. And of course it is a little bit hair-raising, you know, it's like we know that we could come back in exactly the same format that we left and just pick up where we left off, and there wouldn't be any risk or any unknown quantities. But I think it's probably part of any artist's life to challenge themselves and put themselves in a different area in order to expand a little bit.
And challenge the audience to a bit was part of the idea that, you know, for the most part, what people have said, even, you know, some of, you know, a lot of the fans that we've known over decades now, you know, they've become friends, people we can talk to, and everyone was excited about the idea of how it was, you know, what they were going to listen to, and each one of them were saying that songs would start and they wouldn't know particularly what it was, and then as it developed into the song, they realised what it was, and there definitely it's added another level of excitement, and it's changed to a certain extent. It's changed our overall performance, how we interact. You know, it's been a worthwhile experiment that we're really interested in pursuing further.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, is it's very obvious that this is just the beginning. So it's kind of like maybe we're leaning a little bit more at the moment, both for ourselves and to graduate the audience into some things that are a little more familiar and more structured. A
little safer, yeah.
Yeah, but we can see the potential that like we could go a lot of different ways. You know, and I would think for someone, certainly over the years, but even someone that's been coming to consecutive shows on one run, I would think it would be nice to hear a different version of that track. It's always been a bit of a tricky one, you know, when we've been on tour. Sometimes if you even do a different set list in a different city, the people from the city before are like pissed off because they weren't there, you know. So there's always been a bit of a balance of like being fair to everyone in the city, so they get a representation of the show, but you know, not just being robotic. And it's exactly the same thing, and I think this gives us a lot more opportunity to be a bit more creative ourselves.
And it's ticked off all the boxes that, you know, the idea, like Bon was mentioning, this was really like testing the waters for ourselves as much as anything else, about if we can sustain it over a number of shows, whether even the whole length of the set, which we actually, in the end, for technical reasons, dropped a couple of songs, but we're still at around like 85, 90 minutes for a show, which is a decent length, especially at our age. Yeah. And but the good thing is that it's gone exactly as we hoped it would, and we've got so many shows over the course of next year. We're not necessarily doing a sort of full-on tour, as it were, where, you know, it's like what we've done previously, like Bon was saying, a sort of more rock and roll approach to touring, where, you know, it's like say goodbye to our wives and then 7 months later we're home. We're not doing that this time around because it wasn't, you know, it's just not viable anymore as something that's enjoyable. So there will be short runs of maybe like 2 weeks where we'll do an actual like nearly, you know, every other night or whatever, a couple of weekends and a couple of things in between. But then we're doing, you know, so for instance, we're going to the States in May, I think, doing a couple of weeks on the East Coast. Then we're coming back to Europe pretty much for the whole summer and just doing essentially weekends, you know, which is much more familiar actually to most people when they're looking at electronic music. You know, it's certainly in the techno scene, people like Terence Fixmer and Marcel Detman who are playing tonight. It's what you do. Maybe you'll play on a Thursday because it's the summertime, but basically it's Friday night, Saturday night, and then you're home Sunday. And, you know, we wanted to embrace that way of working as well, because you do have a different approach to the job in hand. You know, like it's a lot easier to maintain excitement when it's not such a slog, you know. So that's like the whole of the summer is going to be like that, festivals and a few club shows, and then we go back to the States, do another 2 weeks in September, and then we'll do in the full winter time do another few club shows. But it actually feels really good to have like pretty much a whole year planned out, but it's not being away for a whole year. that we have a life outside of that. And we've got other creative outlets as well. Obviously, the Black Line in LA is one. I work with Terrence. Bon has got animation work. I help my wife with movie stuff. And it's just nice to be able to feel like you're not just sacrificing everything for one project, because obviously psychologically for anyone involved in that, you end up feeling resentful, basically. It's like...
Yeah, and it does put too much pressure on it, you know, like it is your entire life, and you know, like small negotiations or small debates or disagreements become massive because it is your life, and you know that like the next day there's no resting from it, you're all together in a closed environment, you know, it just puts a lot of pressure on it. And so yeah, that's part of our, you know, our quest to just be like, surely there's a way of doing this where it's fun more of the time and not completely stressful, and like your life depends on every decision that's made.
And considering like you were saying, considering David hasn't been on stage with us for quite some time, you know, 30-something years. Simon has never been on stage with us, but has been on stage. Like David and Simon have done Stark, done some shows around Europe, and certainly in London and in Essex. So they're used to working with each other, but then they've got you know, for me and Bon, going on stage, even though we've changed the songs, we pretty much know the songs, you know. Whereas for Simon, and especially David, he has a lot of kind of responsibility on these shows. Yeah. It was a lot of pressure very quickly for him. And so even accounting for that, it still quite quickly in these course of shows became an easy thing to do. I mean, we all did the obligatory touring in December and got colds and sick, but even that was like, you know, that seemed to, it's everything is kind of, like I said, all the boxes we wanted to tick seem to have been.
Yeah.
It was something that we did want to save till last. You know, we deliberately, so Electro Works, where we played in London, and we worked with an old friend of ours who used to do a club called Cozy Club, and now he's doing this new club, can't remember what it's called, No Evil.
Yeah.
But we knew, we've played there before, and it's a tiny club, and it's got its limitations, and everyone knows it's got its limitations. So it's a place to experiment. It's like a live rehearsal, and everyone is fine with that. And it was basically a live rehearsal. Then we stepped it up a little bit in Sweden. We did a big show in Stockholm, and then was added a slightly smaller show, but still, you know, a very kind of professionally put together show. Yeah. And then ended up in Gothenburg. And again, they're all so we knew that we were kind of building up the concept of how to do the show. And we wanted to have, originally Berghain was put at the front, and we were like, no, we want that at the end. We'd like to end with that, knowing that it's kind of somewhere where you want to lead to rather than start from.
Yeah, and once you get going on the shows, you know, we've progressively become more comfortable. Everyone's starting to settle into their roles, and, you know, I mean, even just having a different person next to you on the stage is something to get used to, you know, how they move, what they do. So it's all starting to settle down. So your expectations on these shows, of course, you're aware that the audience may be slightly more crazy or amped up for it, but your expectation is, right, if I go on and I'm feeling fit and healthy and energetic and everything technically works fine, based on what's just happened, it should be amazing, you know. So you just really focus on delivering from your end, and you think if we deliver what we know we've delivered on the other nights, then it's going to be great, you know.
I mean, previously we would sit there, like you say, with the all right, we have to play these. Then it's a matter of spreading those songs out in a set and putting other songs that we think would fit. With this, actually, we gave David carte blanche to Bon gave him a list of tracks that could be a starting point for him to work on, and he pretty much just embraced them straight away and then put them in an order that worked for him. So it's all been Dave's.
Yeah, we just kind of, you know, because Dave and Simon, what they're doing in Stark, I just said whatever songs you think would work with the Stark approach, you know, they're obviously the favourites, like you say, that have to be in there, but they would work with their approach anyway, because a lot of them are more dance floor oriented tracks. But the rest of them, like, if you think you can make them slightly more dance floor friendly and more what you would do with Stark, just pick the ones that you're attracted to.
Yeah.
You know? So just let him run with it, really. Well, I suppose a lot of that comes from the initial group of, you know, David, Doug and I all went to school together, and similar interests growing up, you know, skateboarding, etc., etc. And we were talking about this yesterday in an interview, even in the skateboarding culture, there were certain skaters who formed their own companies and did ad campaigns that were very image conscious and were quite kind of new and, you know, stood out a long way when they were doing it. So I think, you know, some aspects of being involved in those things gave us an awareness of imagery and how imagery and lifestyle and music can all go hand in hand. Obviously, going back further than that, just your basic record sleeve, you know, it's been an influence probably in all of us of a certain age that you pull a record out, you put it on, and there's a sleeve that encapsulates the what's going on the record. But then we met Simon, and Doug started gravitating towards art schools. So there was a whole, you know, common interest on certain sides where that graphic awareness was heightened and became much more integral to the whole thing, and almost as much of a statement as the music at some point.
Yeah, I mean, that was the concept behind Nitzer Ebb product, like Nitzer Ebb being the music, Nitzer Ebb product being the everything. Even like we were talking about this yesterday, that we never want, you know, the lyrics are really important, but no more important than the bass line or how the kick drum sounded or the snare or the percussion and where the vocals were and the structure of the song. Each musical element, of which there weren't many, to be fair, all had their place, and nothing was more important than anything else. And the graphics became kind of a fifth element of that.
Yeah.
So it was just integral to making the music.
Yeah, I saw an interview with Simon recently, and they asked about that, and he said, I'm guessing that level of wrongness could only come from Steve Tom. So he was our old manager.
He used to do tour managing and sound for us, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things we did like that were like obviously deliberately meant to be sort of a bit tongue-in-cheek, but not everyone takes it that way, unfortunately. Some people get quite offended by it, especially nowadays.
Yeah.
More so than ever.
We'd do a lot of silly things. Like we did a couple of, like, we'd been touring quite heavily with the Showtime album. We'd done Depeche. We'd done a lot of touring, like months and months of touring. And then we wanted to do a couple of shows at the end of the year as a kind of like thank you to the London-based fans, which we were still there at the time. So we did shirts for the show, which just said Christmas time on them. You know, utter ridiculous. It's nonsense, really. We never really took anything too seriously, which is
worrying.
Yeah, worrying now. # Why did we do that?
Yeah. Well, I think what we're trying to do to address a variety of issues at once is to have the way we do the live show, have all these creative options where you don't necessarily feel like you have to go into the studio to do a new album, because you can interpret the old tracks in a new way where it's fresh. So, and it's probably an important thing for us this time to take one step at a time. So really, rather than thinking too far ahead, it's like, first of all, let's get a working model for the show and make sure that everyone likes playing live together, and, you know, get the first steps done and build into that initial sort of beta test the idea for expansion, you know, that we can just because, like, you know, if you go back and look at later albums and later tracks, we were making much more sophisticated and layered sounds. And when you start to deconstruct those tracks, there's probably 4 or 5 tracks in one. You know, there's so many sounds that, because Flood and Alan were really good at combining a lot of different things, that, you know, a really nice sound may have been used once or twice really low somewhere in the mix, and at any time, if you strip everything else and pull that sound forwards, it's a really different interpretation. Plus, you know, being in Blackline and being around the modular scene in LA, there's so many ways. If you keep one element that's recognisable from a track, you can do a really cool version with everything else just being like completely, you know, off out somewhere else. So the idea of being creative with what we have and getting the most out of what we have already, and the rest of the questions answer themselves at that point. You decide in yourself whether you know, between ourselves, whether the instinct and the desire is there to take that creative process further, whether to do it in Nitzer Ebb, whether to do it with Stark, whether to do it as a completely new project. So many options, so why put any sort of fence around it now? Just leave it open, and just for now we're just like, yeah, let's just be creative with what we've got, because there's plenty to work with, you know.